Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. And today, we're diving into a really fascinating book. It's called Absolute Justice, Kindness, and Kinship, The Three Creative Principles.
Yeah, that's
And it's a collection of addresses
it's a great title.
by Hadrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad, the fourth successor of the promised Messiah. And these addresses were actually delivered at annual conventions of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community between 1982 and 1988.
Okay, interesting. So they span over like a 6-year period.
Yeah. So we're going to be unpacking
Yeah.
some pretty profound concepts here.
Yeah, I'm excited
I
to
thought
dive.
that's going to be really interesting.
I've read parts of this book, and I think it's gonna be really interesting to see how it all connects.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, these addresses delve into three fundamental principles. The first one is adl, which means absolute justice, Ihsan, which is kindness, and Ita'i Dhil-Qurba, which is kinship. And what's really fascinating is that the author connects these principles not just to Islamic thought, but to the very essence of life itself.
Right, and I think that's what makes this book so powerful, because he's not just talking about, how we should behave as Muslims, but he's talking about how these principles are woven into the very fabric of existence.
Yeah, it's like they're these invisible threads, like weaving together the tapestry of existence.
Exactly, yeah. It's a beautiful way to put it.
So on page 14, the author introduces this idea that these principles are the driving forces
Yeah.
behind creation and evolution.
Okay.
So imagine the journey of life, starting from the simplest organisms and evolving over billions of years into this complexity we see today. So the author argues that this incredible journey has been guided by adl, Ihsan, and Ita'i Dhil-Qurba.
Right, so these principles are at play from the very beginning.
Yes, it's mind-boggling to think about. This cosmic dance playing out over millennia, guided by these principles.
It is mind-blowing, and he actually gives examples even in plants and animals on page 16.
Yeah.
About how these principles are evident.
Right. But then he highlights on page 17 what makes us humans unique, and that is our free will. So unlike plants and animals, we have the power to choose whether we want to follow these principles and evolve,
Yeah.
or reject them,
Yeah.
and potentially regress.
That's a really powerful concept.
It is. And he introduces this really interesting concept called asfala safilin on page 17.
Asfala safilin.
Yes. And this refers to the idea that humans can actually descend to a subhuman level, morally and intellectually,
Whoa.
if they turn away from adl, Ihsan, and Ita'i Dhil-Qurba. And he really goes into this from pages 17 to 26. And it just makes you really ponder the weight of our choices.
Right, because it's saying that we actually have the potential to become worse than animals.
Yeah.
In a sense, because animals are kind of bound by their instincts.
Right.
But we have this consciousness, this awareness.
Yes.
And if we use it wrongly, we can actually fall to a level that is even lower than animals.
And that idea of consciousness and sensitivity is what he talks about on page 18, and how that sets us apart from other living beings. It gives us this incredible responsibility to refine our behavior through these principles.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it can either elevate us or it can really bring us down.
Exactly, yeah.
So let's move on to the first principle, adl, which is absolute justice. And the author takes us on this journey outwards, exploring adl on a cosmic scale. So from pages 27 to 47, he talks about this perfect balance and harmony that we see in the universe.
Right, and one of the examples that comes to mind is on page 39, where he talks about the Earth's magnetosphere.
Oh, yeah. This invisible shield that protects us from harmful cosmic rays.
And it's fascinating because, he's talking about this, and this is something that was actually described in the Quran centuries ago, long before modern science could confirm it.
It really speaks volumes about the divine origin of the Quran.
It does. Yeah, it's amazing how these scientific discoveries are actually corroborating what was revealed in the Quran so long ago.
It's really quite incredible. And then from pages 71 to 106, the author brings us back down to earth and zooms in on the human body as a testament to adl. So our bodies are these intricate ecosystems with systems working in perfect balance. He goes into detail about like insulin production, how it needs to be perfectly calibrated. He talks about that on page 85. And he talks about how crucial calcium is for our bone and cell health. And that's on pages 94 and 95. And even the kidneys, with their complex filtration system, is a marvel of balance.
Yeah, that's on page 93, where he talks about that.
Yeah. And it really makes you realize that even the slightest disturbance in these balances can lead to illness.
Right. So it's like this delicate equilibrium that we need to maintain.
And I think it's not just physically, but perhaps even spiritually.
I agree. There's a connection there.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving on, this concept of balance extends beyond just ourselves. And on pages 54 to 65, the author explores Adil in the animal kingdom, demonstrating the interconnectedness of life. So he explains how this principle governs the delicate relationships between predator and prey, and how it ensures the balance of entire ecosystem. Right, and one of the examples he gives, which I found really fascinating, was about lions.
Oh yeah, what about lions?
He was talking about how lions, despite being these apex predators, they instinctively hunt in a way that minimizes pain to their prey.
Really?
He explains that on page 58.
It makes you think about that inherent order woven into nature.
Yeah, it's like there's this inbuilt sense of justice, even in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, and it really contrasts with how we as humans, with free will, can choose to act either justly or cruelly towards other creatures.
Right, so it's like we have a greater responsibility because we have this choice. Animals are kind of, they're following their instincts.
Right.
But we have this moral compass.
Yeah.
That we need to guide our actions.
It's a stark reminder of our moral responsibility within this web of life.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've seen Adil operating on a cosmic level within our own bodies and even in the animal kingdom. But how does this principle manifest in religion?
That's a great question. And that's where the book takes us next, from pages 107 to 160, and then again from 18 to 19.
Okay.
The author explores how Ihsan and Ita'i Dhil-Qurba form the foundation of religious teachings, not just in Islam, but across various faiths.
And he uses a really powerful example from the story of Noah's flood, and that's on page 133.
Okay.
And he talks about how even Noah's own son wasn't spared when God decided to punish the wrongdoers.
Wow. So it's like justice prevails.
Yes. Even when it comes to family ties.
Even when it's difficult.
Yeah. And it emphasizes this universality of justice, even when it comes to matters of faith.
Yeah, because sometimes we think that, maybe God will make exceptions for certain people.
Right.
But this example shows that justice is absolute.
It is. It applies to everyone equally.
And he also talks about a concept that's often misunderstood, which is jihad.
Right. And that's from pages 161 to 178. He tackles the misconception of forced conversion in Islam.
Okay. So that's a really important topic.
It is.
Because there's so many misconceptions out there about jihad.
Yeah. And he emphasizes that the Quran explicitly prohibits compulsion in matters of faith.
Right. So you can't force someone to accept Islam.
Exactly. True faith can only be chosen freely. And that respect for individual choice is a key element of justice in Islam.
Yeah. And he actually gives examples from the life of Prophet Muhammad that demonstrate this principle.
Right.
So it's not just theoretical. He's actually showing how it was practiced.
It's a crucial point, especially given all the misinformation that often surrounds this topic.
Yeah, definitely.
So speaking of justice, the book then shifts focus to how these principles apply to our everyday interactions.
Okay, so from the cosmic level down to our personal lives.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's from pages 223 to 246.
Yeah.
And then again on pages 347 to 368. The author delves into the importance of treating everyone, regardless of their faith, with fairness and respect.
Right, so this is about how we interact with people on a daily basis, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. We need to treat everyone with justice and respect.
And he actually shares this amazing story about Prophet Muhammad's uncle being taken captive during a battle. And this is on page 230. And even though he was considered an enemy, the Prophet insisted that he be treated with the same dignity and respect.
Really? As any other prisoner.
Yeah, so it's a powerful example of justice in action.
It's incredible that even in the midst of war, there's this emphasis on treating everyone fairly.
Yeah, because war often brings out the worst in people. But the Prophet was showing that. Even in those difficult situations, we have to uphold justice.
Yeah. And there are also some really intriguing stories about Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And this is on page 231. And he stood firm for truth and justice, even when it meant personal loss or going against his own family. So it really showcases his unwavering commitment to these principles.
Yeah, and it shows that. It's not always easy.
Right, to stand up for justice.
It's something that we have to do.
It's inspiring to see these principles lived out so authentically.
It is, yeah. It gives us a role model.
And the author also dives into the Quranic emphasis on truthful and just speech. That's on page 347. So it's a reminder that justice begins with our words and how we choose to communicate. with others.
Right, so it's not just about our actions, it's also about our words.
Yeah, and even those closest to us, how we speak to them really matters.
Yeah, because words can have a powerful impact. They can hurt. They can heal.
Right. So we need to be mindful of how we use them.
It's about cultivating integrity.
Yeah, in all our interactions.
Yeah.
Whether we're speaking to family, friends, or those in positions of authority.
Justice isn't just about these grand gestures. It's woven into the fabric.
Yeah, of our daily lives.
Exactly.
And speaking of family, the book delves into the importance of honoring and respecting our parents, especially as they age. And that's from pages 369 to 381. And the Quran places a profound emphasis on this. And he shares this really poignant story about Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. And he remained steadfast in his faith, despite facing opposition from his own mother. So it shows us how we can balance our familial obligations with our commitment to truth.
And that's on page 373 where he talks about that.
Yeah. It's a beautiful example of balancing those competing responsibilities.
It is, yeah. And it's not always easy, but it's something that we have to strive for.
And the author also reminds us of that beautiful Quranic verse, urging children to always speak to their parents with kindness and humility and recognizing the sacrifices that they've made.
And that's on page 374.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder to cherish and appreciate our parents, even when disagreements arise.
Definitely, yeah, because it's easy to forget sometimes all that they've done for us, and we need to always remember that.
Right, and treat them with kindness and respect.
But justice within the family isn't just about honoring our parents, it's also about ensuring fairness and compassion towards our children.
And he addresses a really tough issue here. And that's on page 382, the practice of killing children out of fear of poverty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this sadly still happens in some parts of the world. But he condemns this practice and emphasizes the Quran's absolute prohibition.
Against it. All right, so there's no justification for taking a child's life.
Yeah. Every human life is precious.
Yeah.
And deserves protection.
Yeah, for sure.
And he also tackles the complex issue of family planning. And that's on page 383. And he presents a perspective that might challenge some modern views.
Okay, what does he say?
He explains the Quranic emphasis on God as the ultimate provider and advises against limiting family size solely out of fear of financial hardship.
Okay.
So it's a nuanced discussion, but it really prompts us to consider these decisions with a sense of responsibility and trusting God's plan.
Right, because ultimately, God is the one who provides.
Yeah. And we need to have faith in that. So to wrap up this first part of our exploration, on pages 395 to 404, the book expands the circle of kindness even further.
Okay, so beyond our immediate families.
Yeah. It's like a ripple effect going outward.
So from our families to
yeah,
our neighbors, strangers, and all those under our care.
Yes. It's about extending compassion and generosity.
Yeah.
To all of humanity.
And he emphasizes that this message transcends religious boundaries.
Yes. It's a call for all humans to cultivate compassion and generosity in their interactions with the world around them.
And that's a beautiful vision.
It is. It really makes you realize how interconnected these principles truly are.
Yeah, they're not just isolated concepts. They all work together.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. To create a more just and compassionate world.
Exactly. And that's something that I think we all need in our lives.
Absolutely. So we'll continue this exploration in our next deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it. So as we kind of delve deeper into absolute justice, kindness, and kinship, it's fascinating to see how these principles are actually like interwoven, even into the fabric of like Islamic worship.
Well, that's right. He starts to explore that connection on page 205.
Yeah.
He talks about how the structure of Islamic prayer itself embodies this principle of justice.
Right. So give me an example.
Well, he gives this example of how Islam allows for both congregational and individual prayer. So it offers this flexibility to suit different circumstances.
Right. And he explains this on page 206. And it makes sense because imagine if only congregational prayers were allowed. You know, many people might struggle to fulfill those obligations.
Especially those who can't always make it to the mosque.
Exactly. Or if they're traveling or
they're sick or, whatever reason.
So it's like Islam recognizes the diversity of human lives.
Yeah. And makes space for everyone to connect with the divine.
Yeah. And then on page 208, he brings up the tahajjud prayer, which is offered before dawn. And what's interesting is that there's no strict rule about reciting it aloud or silently.
Oh, so there's room for personal preference.
Yes. And he even shares an anecdote about two of Prophet Muhammad's companions, Abu Bakr and Umar. So Abu Bakr preferred to pray silently, while Umar recited aloud. And when the Prophet learned about their different approaches, he didn't criticize either of them.
That's a refreshing perspective. So what did he say?
He advised Abu Bakr to add a little voice to his prayer, and Umar to soften his voice, so as not to disturb others.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's such a nice balance.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of how Islam encourages balance and consideration for others, even in these personal acts of worship.
It's a reminder that our actions, even in our private spiritual practice, can have an impact on those around us.
Yeah, definitely. And this sensitivity extends beyond prayer.
Yeah.
You know, on page 209, he brings up a Quranic verse that advises against speaking in a harsh or unpleasant manner, even when reciting the Quran.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but how they're delivered.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and he even shares a story about the renowned scholar, Sadi Shirazi, who encountered a man reciting the Quran in a very loud and unpleasant voice.
Oh, I've definitely heard that before.
And Sadi, known for his wisdom, advised the man to lower his voice, not for his own sake, but for God's sake, because he was concerned that people might turn away from the Quran because of the way it was being recited.
It's a powerful reminder that even our intentions, while important, don't excuse us from considering the impact of our actions on others.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between personal expression and social responsibility.
Yeah, I really like that.
And this emphasis on balance is also evident in how Islam approaches different forms of worship.
Okay.
So on page 212, he explains that while Islam encompasses various forms of worship, that are found in other religions, it cautions against going to extremes in any of them.
So it's about moderation, finding that middle ground.
Yes, exactly. And he actually shares a really interesting story on page 218 about 3 companions of the Prophet who made vows to engage in these extreme forms of worship.
Okay.
So one vowed to spend every night in prayer,
wow,
another to fast every day, and the third to abstain from marriage.
That's intense. What happened?
When the Prophet heard about their vows, he gently reminded them that he, despite being the most righteous among them, still maintained a balanced lifestyle. He slept, he fasted some days but not others, and he was married.
It's like a reminder that true piety lies in following the Prophet's example, not in pushing ourselves to unsustainable extremes.
Right. Because ultimately that can be harmful.
Yeah.
To our physical, mental, and even spiritual well-being.
Right. And this consideration for human limitations is also reflected in how Islamic worship accommodates diverse circumstances. So, for example, on page 219, the author points out that while healthy adult men living near a mosque are encouraged to attend congregational prayers, those whose professions or situations prevent them from doing so are given flexibility.
Right. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah. Islam acknowledges that not everyone has the same capacity or opportunities, and it provides accommodations accordingly.
And that's true justice, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
To recognize those differences and to make space for everyone.
And then on page 220, there's this beautiful description of how social status becomes irrelevant inside the mosque.
Oh, yeah. Everyone stands shoulder to shoulder, rich and poor alike. No one is allowed to reserve a special place for themselves. It's like a powerful symbol of equality. It reminds us that in the eyes of God, it's our piety and character that truly matter, not our worldly possessions or status.
Right. And this commitment to justice and equality extends beyond the mosque. It permeates all aspects of social life, as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive.
This is really making me think about how these principles can be applied in my own life.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this book. It prompts you to reflect and consider how to embody these values in your own unique way.
I'm really excited to see where this exploration takes us next. So welcome back to our deep dive into absolute justice, kindness, and kinship. And in this final part, we're going to be looking at how these principles can guide our interactions with others.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to note that the author emphasizes that these principles extend to everyone, regardless of faith.
Right, so it's not just about how Muslims treat other Muslims, but how we interact with all of humanity.
Exactly.
That's a really important point.
So where does he start with this?
Well, on page 357, he brings up Prophet Muhammad's last sermon. And in this sermon, the Prophet proclaimed a charter of racial equality, declaring that an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a white person have any superiority over a black person.
That's a powerful message of unity and brotherhood.
It is. And it transcends all these artificial boundaries.
It seems like a direct challenge to the prejudice and discrimination that sadly still persist today.
Absolutely. And the author connects this back to the Quran, which consistently emphasizes the inherent equality of all human beings.
But as you said, racism remains a problem. And on page 360, the book delves into the root of this issue.
So what does he say about how racism starts?
He suggests that it often begins on a very personal level, with people drawing distinctions between themselves and others based on trivial differences.
Okay, so like little things.
Yeah, like maybe someone's accent, or the way they dress, or their cultural practices. And it might seem harmless at first, but it can easily create a culture of disrespect and prejudice.
Right, it's like those small acts of exclusion or mockery. They build up over time, and they lead to something much more sinister.
Exactly. And the Quran addresses this directly on page 361. It advises against mocking or belittling others, even in jest, because it can plant the seeds of prejudice and hatred.
Right. It may seem like a joke at the time, but it can have these long-term consequences.
Yeah, those seeds can eventually grow into something far more destructive, like conflict and violence.
So a lack of justice and respect
on
a personal level can ultimately escalate to violence.
On a larger scale.
Exactly. That's a scary thought.
And on page 362, he links the rise of warfare to a lack of justice in society.
So when people feel oppressed or marginalized, they're more likely to resort to violence as a way to fight back.
Right, because they feel like they have no other option.
It's a reminder that justice is not just this abstract ideal, it's essential for peace and stability, both within societies and between nations.
And on page 363, he critiques how some powerful nations have historically imposed their will on weaker nations, often under the guise of peacekeeping.
So he's saying that true peace can only be achieved through genuine justice, where the rights and dignity of all people are respected, regardless of their power or status.
It's a powerful message.
It is. That challenges us to look beyond these superficial solutions and to address the root causes of conflict.
So it's not just about, putting a Band-Aid on the problem. It's about addressing the underlying injustice.
Yeah, that's creating the conflict in the first place.
And it seems like these principles, if truly embraced, could have a profound impact on the world.
They really could. So let's shift our focus back to the personal realm for a moment. And the book dedicates a significant portion to the importance of justice and kindness within the family unit.
Right. And we've already talked about how these principles shape our relationships with our parents and children. But just to recap, on page 369, he emphasizes the Quranic injunction to treat our parents with respect and honor, especially as they age. And he reinforces this with the story of Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, which you talked about earlier. Despite his mother's opposition to his faith, he remained committed to her well-being, showing us that upholding truth and justice doesn't require neglecting our familial obligations. And that's on page 373, where he talks about that.
Right. It's a beautiful example of balancing.
That's competing responsibilities.
And on page 374, he highlights that poignant Quranic verse, urging children to always speak to their parents with kindness and humility, recognizing the sacrifices that they've made.
It's a powerful reminder to cherish and appreciate our parents, even when disagreements arise.
Yeah, because it's easy to take our parents for granted, but we need to remember all that they've done for us.
And treat them with kindness and respect.
But justice within the family isn't just about honoring our parents. It's also about ensuring fairness and compassion towards our children.
Right. It's about extending compassion and generosity to all of humanity, exactly. On page 402, the author highlights a Quranic verse that calls on believers to show kindness to a wide range of people, relatives, orphans, the needy, neighbors, companions, travelers, and even those who are enslaved.
It's a beautiful reminder that our compassion should have no boundaries.
Right. It transcends social status, background, or beliefs.
And I think that's the core message of absolute justice, kindness, and kinship. It's a call to action, urging us to embody these principles in every aspect of our lives.
To strive for justice in our dealings with others, extend kindness to those in need, and cultivate a sense of kinship that embraces all of humanity.
It's a challenging yet inspiring vision of a world where these values guide our actions and shape our interactions.
And as we conclude this deep dive, it leaves us with a profound sense of hope and possibility.
Yeah, a world transformed by justice, kindness, and kinship. It's a vision we're striving for. And, if you're ready to explore these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out the book for yourself. You can find it at www.elislam.org.
We'll be sure to include a link in the description below.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
See you next time.